You may have seen the story in the stack, but Open Secrets has a report out showing that UVA, which is not a huge school, all right? I want people to understand it's 10,000 undergraduate students. It is the state school of the University of Virginia, of the state of Virginia, and they are spending $20 million on 235 DEI positions every single year, 20 million a year. Thomas Jefferson is rolling over in his grave. It's insane. And I would invite people to sort of just type in UVA, DEI, open the books, and you'll get the story on that. And I thought of it because you're talking about all the great work that you guys are doing on hundreds of campuses. And you talked about Hillsdale being the new Harvard. You know, I'll tell a little personal story. When I was graduating high school, I got into Harvard and Stanford, and I turned both of them down to go to UVA because of Thomas Jefferson, because I was obsessed with the guy and how he built this university. You know, he was up on Monticello, like 20 miles away, looking down with this telescope and watching the architects and making sure that they were constructing it in the way that he imagined. So he built this living, breathing, teaching, studying university, what the academic village of Charlottesville. And to see where it is now, it's a disgrace. And I'm going to throw it back to you because that's all I had for that.
I work with whoever got the most dollars to make the most sense. And that currently looks like being a professor at the University of Virginia. I'm still working. I still work on a plantation. I do. But I'm literally glowing. I don't know that I'm like glamoring for manipulation's sake, but I'm glamoring the like white supremacist patriarchy sometimes to be able to get our feet in the door.
It's like going to UVA wasn't like, I didn't escape, like I landed on a plantation.
Listen.
You know, like that's, again.
Yes.
Again.
They are so thirsty to be down. It means little to me. I'm like, did you give all your money and all your time to save us? Then what is really being down? And I love that literally I only think about us, and I get a lot of money and a lot of team and a lot of resources to also build squads that will only and very explicitly and boundariedly think about us and our joy and our possibility. Well, what I have to say is I'm having this conversation in an echo chamber because I'm an academic and I spend a lot of time writing grants and writing papers, but it's not for them.
Yeah.
None of this work is for them. They have it. They're the primary beneficiaries and they don't even know how to read it. I thought I was going to come home, but then I got this remarkable opportunity to do transdisciplinary scholarship with bankroll Thomas Jefferson on some salvation for Sally Hemings moment.
And I'm not gonna fib here in the spirit of complete transparency. I did do a little bit of that open AI chat GPT a little bit to see what is this stuff called inclusive communication. So you're not going to call you guinea pigs, but we're going to see where this gets us. I went out there to good old chat GPT. That's just my new best friend at work, it seems. And they kind of talk back, but not in a bad way. So I dig it. And if I could say dumb it down, it does, or bring it up, it does. So I like it. It listens to me. So when I went out and I kind of asked the question, okay, inclusive communication, what does that look like? What should you be considering? It brought forth 7 aspects. That's a little bit of a tiny lie because I rumble in my head. And as far as I know, it's just me in there, but I don't know. There might be other personalities. So I want to give you some tools. And this is where I'm moving away from chat GPT and I'm moving into Dare to Lead land.
Are you thinking about the body? Are you thinking about a body? And I also just maybe want to, a little provocatively, have you respond a little bit to the kind of privilege that comes from being a white man who can dissociate his body from his sculptures.
Well, I would say one of the things that was loud and clear from our racial equity task force work was the trauma that those monuments were having on a daily basis for our community members that were being subjected to them as passersby, right? And I think our work, particularly this notion of the racial equity work being rooted in our inclusive excellence strategic framework, but also having us a sixth area of healing repair, right? That work of repair and healing had to involve, I think, being intentional about steps being taken to remove that. And so I think by many's representation, the removal of those statues were an important step in the right direction. There were members of our indigenous community who were present when George Rogers Clark was being removed and really remarked. I think some, were overcome with emotion, right? And so it wasn't the end all be all, that meaning that there's still plenty of work to be done in that healing and repair space, but it was a step in the right direction, and I think they acknowledged that, and so it needs to have its important place in time, but also we can't take our foot off the gas of this work, and we have to continue to look to what that evolution of healing and repair needs to be for the communities impacted, by those symbols, of racism, for sure.
One of the things I really talk about when we're moving from racial oblivion, okay? Does anybody know the tenets of white supremacy? Can anybody tell me one, and you can unmute yourself and tell me one tenet of white supremacy? Chris, I see you smiling. No one? Why is that? Come on, Chris.
Perfectionism.
Perfectionism. Can you talk about what perfectionism is?
Ash. Perfection is
You're doing great.
Having a priority on doing what's right versus I may be mixing stuff up, versus relationship. Having blinders on to doing what's right. Is that it, or is that
It's close. It's close. Believing everything has to be just right.
Well, yeah, everything has to be just right, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And if I can't talk about it, or especially when it comes to race, white people always say I'm gonna mess it up. I'm not gonna say it the right way.
Yeah.
A lot of that stems from their history of being perfection, right? Because if things were not perfect, then we were unable to control, unable to rule, and easily able to disregard Black and brown spaces, transactions, and interactions. So one of the things, and I appreciate you, Chris, for jumping on. One of the things I talk about, right, we pause when I say, what are the tenets of white supremacy, right? Because I don't think we've been taught how to pay attention to white supremacy. But if I ask you about slavery, I can talk about how long that's been going on. And I think about the tenets of the subjugated, right? But I think I want to stay with slavery, right? Because I think everyone who knows me, I always talk about the lens that we carry, the lens of, oh, poor Black people. Oh, that is so hard. Oh, I'm so sorry what happened to Black people, right? But one of the things I believe, when you start becoming racially aware and racially sensitive, racially responsible, you not only look at what happened to Black people, Black and brown body, you start to look at what white people did, what happened. I was in a workshop the other day, and a white woman said to me that when she looks at those horrifying, dehumanizing pictures of the lynchings, and where there'd be like 500 white people, 5,000 white people, and taking pictures of a mangled, brutalized Black body. You'll see pictures of white people underneath it. You'll see moms. You'll see kids underneath it. What do you think impacted, how do you think that affected white bodies? How do you think that affected your ancestry?
Today we walked the grounds with my son. He pointed at the statue and said, "Ghost, ghost, ghost, ghost!" "Mijo," I said, "that's Thomas Jefferson." He stood, finger out, heat bouncing off the bricks, staring for a while. And then he said, "He didn't like all people, so it's me." With the line down the hall to my office hours, wondering what my colleagues are thinking. "You had really long office hours today." She must not need the time for her research. Her teaching probably isn't rigorous. I don't hate the office hours. They're exhausting. I still can't sleep. My son came to my office today, came in and said, "Ghosts, ghosts, 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 ghosts." I told him there were none, but also thought, yeah, plenty of ghosts. That room is a depository of ghosts.
Because of the work that I do, which is often in those moments of dialogue with our community, in those moments where we're in a session and we're folks are on that learning edge, right? And something that you're probably sort of working with too, is you actually talk to people who are kind of going into that space. That emotionality can be a barrier. I think particularly for people, I'm a queer white settler, right? There's stuff that comes up for me in terms of all that we know about engaging in this work, and there's no getting around, Kevin and I work at a predominantly and historically white institution, right? So there's a lot of emotionality in a lot of different ways. I think one thing that's been important for us in some of our at least education work, and specifically the anti-racism education work, is to help people understand that our goal is really simply just to give them context and tools for reflecting on the world around them. And so specifically for white folks, right, I think, and I'll just be sort of out there if I can, right, which is that often it's about helping them, because they're hearing a lot in the world around them. Often it's really about helping them focus on the distinction of whiteness as an identity and whiteness as an ideology, right? And being able to make that distinction, giving them thinking tools and reflection tools to understand that difference of when you're talking about ideology, which is where a lot of it sits, is that you're really talking about those structures, right? And what that means as opposed to who I show up as a person in a particular way. So I think that ideology, identity kind of distinction can help white people in particular handle some of that emotionality. But I will say, because we do a lot of sessions that are sort of interracial, right, for Black, Indigenous, other people of color who kind of come into those spaces, it's often frustrating, and we try to do the best we can. I mean, frustrating is the nice way of saying it. It's hurtful. It's really hurtful at times. And so we do the best we can to spend time talking about the commitments that we're going to make to each other when we're in dialogue. And in particular, we really try to talk about how we want to center, for example, Black voices, and sort of share stories of everyday resilience and cultural contributions and thrivance in the face of a lot of those obstacles, because it's stories, those are stories that don't get told, and those are stories that are often told from a white gaze and not actually centered on Black, Indigenous, Asian, Latinx folks, right? And I think that's been something, that emotionality is hard too, and I think still working on what that looks like.
I think a lot of students would agree, I think especially from the Republican side, that I think it somewhat relates to not necessarily how the peers are going to treat them if they were to express their beliefs, but somewhat of how the faculty would treat them if they were to express their beliefs. If you had an open-ended question about something freedom of speech related, but your teacher has been talking about something that definitely goes with the left side, would the student feel uncomfortable or feel they would be punished saying something in their paper that would go against them? And I feel like that's a big issue, is not teacher retaliation per se, but students feeling uncomfortable about speaking because they feel as if they're going to be retaliated by their teacher, or they'll suffer academically or socially. But I just thinking having a more confined group of students to talk about it would probably be, that's what I think is probably a good solution.
what is it that you could say for yourself has been your why that has kept you motivated, especially when you began this journey of really centering anti-racism and, you know, equity for all? What was it that was your why that you came back to? Because again, for you as a, you know, white female, that you have a lot of privilege, so you don't necessarily have to do this work. So just what carries you through, so that maybe we can inspire some of our participants who are trying to find their why, of why they're picking this up every day to do this work when they could just put it on the shelf.
Yeah, that sort of privilege of ignorance and sort of the sort of fallacy of innocence. I think what's been important for me, so I think what's part of my bio that other folks might know or not know is that, you know, I grew up in rural Appalachia. And I think that there are a couple things, but really actually when I was an undergraduate at UVA, I had the opportunity to take a class with Julian Bond, who, you know, as many may know, is an amazing, he's been amazing for the university. Obviously he passed away a couple of years ago, but I had the opportunity to learn from him in particular ways and to be given those thinking tools that let me see differently, and also let me see, I don't know if you all have taken up Metzel's book, sort of Dying of Whiteness necessarily in your reading groups. But I think, you know, the space that I've been in where I grew up, you know, you could see it, right? The way that white people are actually dying of whiteness too. In my immediate sort of peer group, I mean, it's kind of personal, right? But it's like I had a couple of cousins, they had friends, like the sort of toxicity of whiteness around them and certain things that were happening for them. Many of them were dying prematurely also, right? Sort of in their 20s, you know, and I think it's just, I've had a range of experiences that have helped me see that, and to see how anti-Blackness, racism in general, and white supremacy in particular, that actually limits my self-authorship for who I can be as a person. And I think it's a lot of different things that get people to that. But for me, that's a lot of what it was about, right? Is like, I can't actually be who I could possibly be because I'm stuck in this too.
Kujichagulia.